Welcome all. Thanks so much for joining us. During these interesting times, we would like to share some great discussions with professionals and thought leaders, where we talk about the realities of remote work and virtual work in a growing open talent market. We do deep dives in important topics to tackle some of the real challenges and really ask some hard questions. Hi, I'm Emma, and I'm the CEO of One Circle HR, the coolest freelance platform for HR consultants. We are cheerleaders of virtual remote work, and with every discussion, we hope we can make the journey of some of you towards virtual work a little bit more enjoyable. We know there are great content out there, and we want ours to be easy to digest and to implement with depth of expertise. But as well, we want it to be fun. Today joining me is Ann Betz. Ann is the co-founder of BEabove Leadership. She's an international speaker and trainer on the intersection of neuroscience, coaching, and human transformation. Ann, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself and this interesting connection between neuroscience and remote work and specifically with work?
Absolutely. Thank you. It's really great to be here. And I should say, this is my cat apparently has decided to join us. So she'll be co-facilitating with me today, and she helps keep my brain regulated. So basically what you said, I've always been interested in what makes people do what they do. You know, why do some people consistently act in ways that create effective solutions in their companies, in their lives? And why do some people consistently act in ways that are self-sabotaging or really toxic to other people?
Yes.
I've just always wanted to understand that. And so about 10 or 12 years ago, I got really fascinated with neuroscience. And that was right about the time it was starting to enter the leadership space. So I have really been doing my own deep dive on what is happening in our brain under things like stress. Why is it that we work better in teams, things like that. So I've thought a lot about your question about remote work, so I'm excited to talk about that today.
So how does working remotely or leading a remote team impacts our brain and theirs?
Oh my gosh, there's kind of different layers. So I think there's kind of a general impact that has to do with how we love to, how we're sort of tribal by nature. I think there are communication impacts, and then I think there's discipline and productivity impacts. And I also just want to start out by saying, I think there are sort of positive and negative impacts. Everything's like a trade-off. And, I'm excited because I work remotely. I work with people all over the world. You get this amazing global talent pool. For many of us, I just want to start with sort of one of the positive things about working remotely is you have control over your own work environment. And I think that can giving people any kind of sense of control really reduces stress. And so that I think is can be a really positive thing, that people don't, my coworker isn't chewing gum next to me or making a loud phone call or bothering me. I can focus. Different personality types have different aspects there. I think the other real advantage for companies is there's some cost saving. And I want to talk a little bit, I want to be sure we get to later about where to spend some of that money. So, because I think you may save, but there are things that don't happen because you're not in person where you need to be spending.
Yeah,
so,
that's true.
Yeah.
And I've noticed something. A lot of people as well have developed a certain level of trust in their own capabilities working remotely, with the current situation, etc. They've been forced to work remotely, but at some point there was some anxiety and fear. But as time passed and they have adjusted to working remotely, that level of trust in their capabilities, that they are able to deliver on work, it doesn't matter wherever they're working, etc. as long as they have their laptop with them, they're focused and they are capable of actually delivering on projects.
And I think this is part of one of the shifts that we're seeing in the workplace is more less time focus and more performance focus.
Yes.
So it's not about how many hours you're sitting your butt in the chair, as it was when I was in the work world. It's more about what are you actually accomplishing. And that gives people, that's very brain healthy because it gives people this sense of efficacy and control. But I do think that, and I want to talk about sort of what some of the challenges are, and then not just be the problem, but then say, well, therefore, what are the recommendations?
Yes.
Like, what do we need to do? And one of the things that I think is really interesting in terms of sort of a general challenge, and this is maybe one of the bigger ones, is that the brain has the brain is always, it's like if you think about, I'm trying to think of the best way to put it, but it's like your car only has so much gas, right? Your brain
Yes.
only has so much energy, and it is always trying to conserve energy. And being with people in person actually takes less energy from your brain. And so what we find is that people actually process more efficiently when they're physically present with other people. So I think that is a big challenge in this, in terms of this remote working, is that we have to be aware that the hours of the day may seem a little different and you may be actually more tired.
Wow. Is this one of the reasons why video conferencing becomes tiring?
Yeah, I think there's a number of reasons, and some of them we get into when we think about communication.
Mm-hmm.
One of the ways that we are designed to efficiently process is by communicating by taking in information in a multisensory way.
Yes.
And so when we've got video conferencing, first of all, even though I'm looking at the person, we may think that's bigger. There are things that we're missing, and I'll give you a really interesting example of one that we take in a lot of information we're not even aware of. It's how dilated are the other person's pupils. So when the pupils are less dilated, it actually means we're more open to seeing more. When they're more narrowed, they may be more closed off. We're not necessarily always conscious of that. In fact, rarely. But it may be why I feel more connected to the other person. And it's very hard to see on a Zoom screen.
Yes.
So even visually, we're cut off from we're cut off from our being able to sense peripherally. We're looking straight ahead. We don't have smell, which gives us information. Touch. The research shows that even a very quick touch, even just a handshake, will communicate warmth or coldness or dominance, or, sometimes I once shook hands with someone who crunched my hand, a man, crunched my hand so much it hurt for a week after.
Wow.
So sometimes it's obvious, but sometimes we may be processing it sort of below even consciousness, but it has to do with how we feel toward the person. So we're cut off from all of that, and we're having to use all of our sort of auditory processing and visual processing, and it gets exhausting because we just don't have as many channels available.
Yeah. And do you think, leading remote teams from a leader perspective, it must be really difficult, right, to be to be able to take all of this into consideration. So what would be your advice?
Well, I think one of the real challenges about leading remote teams, I think there's a number of them. There's one is the conversation. I think the conversation in the hallway, the informal conversation between you and the team as a leader, between the team and each other, the way that information gets shared in organizations is rarely just a memo or a meeting. Right?
Yeah.
And from your organizational work that there's like always the shadow company. There's like the company and the shadow company, right?
Yeah.
It's so much harder to pick up on that when it's remote. We go a lot more black and white in terms of what's like, well, it said it in the memo. And it's much harder to manage what's happening emotionally for everyone. Whereas if you've got a in-person team, you're picking up on things in the hallway, you're picking up on body language, all of this. You may have a better sense, I need to reach out to that person. Remotely, you may not have as much. And so one of my recommendations for leaders who are leading remote teams is sort of, and I'm going to talk a little, I want to actually then even talk about another aspect of this. But one is you need to work on your emotional intelligence if that's at all low. You need to pay attention to that. And you need to be active in terms of checking in about what's not being said, because you're not going to pick up on it as much just in the feeling in a meeting or in passing somebody in the
How to
hallway.
do that? How to do that? Oh, like saying checking in is easy, but how to do it?
Well, I think that this is one of the reasons that I love coaching managers in coaching skills. And I'm an executive coach by background. I've been one for 20 years. That's how I really got into this field. And so I think, part of it might just be making that part of the culture of the team.
Yeah.
Part of the expectation, so it doesn't seem weird. But I've got actually 2 suggestions for that, because I think the other thing is that, and let me back my way into that, because I think a big challenge in working remotely is that when you are working in person, other people on the team may be doing more of the work, of the team and social and emotional work. What I mean by that is that if you come in and you've had you come into the office and maybe you've had a bad evening with your partner, there are people there. You usually, hopefully, at least have one person in the office you can, have a cup of coffee and say, yeah, I had kind of a bad evening. And just having somewhere to have somebody go, yeah, even if all they do is say, oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
That can kind of reset the person so they're more able to work. And so as a leader, your team members are kind of helping manage each other socially and emotionally. May not have that as much in a remote team.
Yeah.
And so you then and one of the things that's a real risk with remote work is social isolation.
Yes.
And especially, right now we're taping this in the middle of COVID-19. So people were not, able to go out and do their other socializing. But work, even in normal times, work is a major social place for people, right?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
You don't have that remotely.
Yeah.
And so a leader needs to be aware every human being has social emotional needs. And if they're not met, you run the risk of, there's also actually lots of health risks for loneliness, and you run the risk of depression.
Yeah.
So it's easy for a leader to think as long as they're producing, everything's fine, and not check in on the whole human being.
Yes.
And I do think that needs to be a concern of remote teams. Does that make sense from an HR perspective?
Of course. It's difficult to engage your people when they are with you in the same office, let alone when when you have a dispersed team, or
Right.
they're working at home or anywhere to that matter.
Right.
So engaging them with the organization within the team itself. So one of the recommendations that we were giving recently is for businesses that have employees that are working remotely, but they're also parents and they have to deal as well maybe with homeschooling. And there's,
oh my God.
yes, and there's the whole stress around it, and the difficulty of managing your own personal time, your work, and the current anxiety that is happening in the current situation. So one of the tips that we give as well is to create exactly that team dynamic that you're talking about, but virtually.
Yeah.
So sort of creating like a small community for parents that are working within the organization to share tips on how to deal with their kids, or how to organize their time, or if they have kids within the same age group, basically, or they have a temper, or they're not studying, or refusing to listen to their parents. It's the usual parent, but the working parent stuff and it comes from your peers and your colleagues, and then suddenly you feel that you're not alone. Everybody is dealing with this. So when it just happens that you have all of this anxiety, you psychologically, I mean, you're the master in this, but you remind yourself that everybody goes through that, and then suddenly you just calm down.
Yeah, and
yeah,
you feel like somebody gets you and
yes,
sees you. And I think one of the problems with working remotely is, like we get on a Zoom call and it's like, let's get to work,
yeah,
because it feels that focus, it literally is a more narrow focus. It sort of puts our brain into what we call the task positive network. Let's get things done. The task positive network is wonderful for focusing on things. It will wear you out if you spend 8 hours having to be focused. And what ends up happening is our brains need to both be focused, and then they need time to just sort of wander a little bit and not be so focused.
yeah,
And so, part of what that happens in most offices. You wander off to the coffee and you're like, oh, hey, new cartoon on your wall, and all of that gives your brain a break. And we
yes,
don't need that as much remotely. So I think when I think about like sort of where to invest, and this is related to productivity, people are more productive when they have a chance to not be focused.
yes,
So creating things, sponsoring things like the parent group, like trivia night, like, a virtual happy hour, like, anything like that, or a joke, a string of appropriate jokes, or whatever it is that is non-focused, and putting a little attention and effort there, I think ends up actually having a positive impact on productivity.
yeah,
Because people get this kind of like their brain relaxes. Humor is a really good way to do that. Having a contest. I mean, we do this in, organizations do this in person. I remember, we used to do United Way Week, and people would do stand-up comedy and all of that. Not only does it bond us as a team, it gives us that release from work,
yeah,
and we're able to come back and focus better.
yeah, that's true. And there's we always speak about the challenges of working remotely and how to deal with it, whether from a worker perspective or from a leader perspective. But there's so much more in it, right? It's as well, it brings in creativity to the team when you are able to infuse freshness of thought into your team by leveraging on people working with you remotely from different sides of the world. And then it's a great experience. I think that's also one of the positives of having a rework team, a virtual team, leveraging on independent consultants.
Yeah, you bring in all of these fresh perspectives. And so I have actually 2 practical suggestions there. And part of the challenge is people think, kind of work is work, and they forget that work is also social.
Yeah.
And that the social and those bonds, if we're connected and we feel like we know each other, and we're able to get to work with more trust, and we're more efficient. So it's not like, I think sometimes people, especially people who are, love to produce, they think, oh, any other time is wasted time, and it's not. And so 2 practical tips for leaders. One is, get yourself a list of icebreaker questions like, what's your internal weather today? Before we go into this meeting, everybody, I'm not talking about the weather outside. If you're, internally, what's your weather?
Yeah.
And you don't have to spend a lot of time with people who say, I'm partly cloudy. That's all they need to say. What that does is it helps people get there and be seen as a human being, and not just a human doing. So get yourself a list of questions like that you can start if you work in a tech company, be like, okay, what video game are you today? What app are you today? Just because it gives people a chance to be there as a human, and it will help connect people in a virtual meeting. And it only needs to take 5 minutes. And I promise you, you will be at least 10 minutes more efficient if you do this. So that's number 1.
Yeah.
The other is, and this is something I have discovered because I work remotely and I have a very dear business partner and we talk a lot. And I had this realization that, you know, we don't always get the time to just hang out over a cup of coffee or a glass of wine or whatever. But one of the things that can give you that same energy, and this is more of a one-to-one, go for a walk. Put both people on headset, get outside if you can. If you can't, maybe find a way you can walk around the building. I'm not exactly sure. But what that does is it tells your body that you're in more of an open mode. And we will have the most amazing creative ideas when we're both walking, or even if just one of us is. It brings a different energy. So if you want to be sure you are finding out what's going on with the person, maybe have them, you know, say, we're going to let's just go for a 10-minute walk together. You walk, I'll walk.
That's amazing. That's a virtual walk. Yeah, that's amazing.
It is, the body and the sort of the being kind of processes it like, oh, we're kind of just going for a walk together. It's less formal. The brain becomes a little more open. People are often a little more willing to share maybe what's really going on. Sometimes if you're stuck for a creative idea, then say, okay, let's get away from our computers. Let's go for a walk and let's just see what inspires us. You're shifting things up, and I think that would be a recommendation.
Yeah,
The other
that's nice.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I'm interested to hear more about your recommendations. I never thought about this virtual walk.
Well, here's what it does. There's these two networks in the brain, the task network, and I was talking about, and that's like where we're like a horse wearing blinders, and it's really good for getting things done. You know, I love that. I mean, I love to work on a PowerPoint or work on a curriculum or something and get real focused. Feels great. But at a certain point, it's like the horse gets tired.
Yeah.
And it needs to just kind of be in the field and wandering around. And as long as I'm at my computer, I tend to be more focused.
Right.
And it's great for, like, let's get through the list. It's not good for creativity. It's not where really inspirational ideas come from. They come from a more open, less precise interaction with the world. And that's why I say, get out and take a walk, get away from the computer when what you need is either human connection or creativity.
Oh, yeah.
Two other really, to me, really important things is, don't use Zoom unless you need to record like you and I are doing, but don't use Zoom for one-to-one conversations. There's no reason for it. Unless you need to share your screen, right?
Yes.
Unless you need to work on a document together, share your screen, or you're recording something. If you need to connect with the person, get on the phone, because what ends up happening is the intimacy of being on the phone like that makes us more connected as humans. When we cut off the visual field, we amp up this connection, and it just tends to make us feel, even though you're not seeing the person, it actually takes us out of this sort of very focused network into a more broadening network where we're more able to access both how we feel and how they feel.
Oh, that's amazing. My
Go ahead.
team and I have, we do this 90-20 rule where we work for 90 minutes and then we take 20 minutes break. So we can, and then during the 20 minutes, you can do housework, take care of the kids, go for a walk, whatever that is, but just to disconnect for 20 minutes. And it helps.
That's really good. And that's sort of saying your brain can only focus for so long at one time. And then it's like the horse that's been working really hard, let it free to just, you know, chew some grass in the field. The other recommendation that I have for this time is being aware that people need, you know, social connection. one of I think the Gallup engagement survey, one of the questions that they ask is something, you probably know this better than me, but it's something along the lines of, I have a good friend at work.
Yes. Do you have a good friend at work? Yes, exactly.
Okay. And that's a huge marker. It's one of the critical markers of engagement, because what that is I have a place where I'm emotionally safe.
Mm-hmm.
And I can tell you, someone who sees me as the human being, who will be aware if something's going on with me that's not okay psychologically, and provide some support, or maybe ideally help me find some resources. That is a critical part of this. And you can still have that virtually, but it's not as built in.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the recommendations that I have, and this is a financial, you're saving money by having a remote team, right?
Yeah.
If you're not good at this as a leader, if having this one-to-one deep connection with your team and being really cued into where they're at emotionally is not your strong suit, get them a coach. Spend some of that money on coaching. It will pay off so much in terms of helping them regulate their stress, helping them regulate everything that's going on, process what's happening, even have new creative ideas. It's not a huge expenditure. You're saving a lot of money. And I think having that person they can talk to, be fully themselves with, as part of the even if it's a couple of times a month, absolutely even more important when we're working virtually.
Yeah, great advice. I really hope a lot of companies would do that. Savings on rent are huge, and yeah, and we need to think about it more on investing on the people that are actually going through this transition of working remotely, and the more we make it a successful transition and we help them out, the better it is for our business. Yeah,
Absolutely. And for me, it's not anything just about being nice. To
yeah.
me, what I know is that a brain that, if you've got an employee who's really stressed
Mm.
about anything, their brain power, their higher brain that you need for creativity, good decision making, long-term planning, goals, focus, and discipline, if they are under stress for whatever reason, that part of their brain diminishes in its capacity. And so, help giving them, spending some money on an executive coach who's going to help them regulate, manage that, learn how to have long-term strategies so they don't get as stressed. That is what a coach does. One of the many things they do. What you're going to get is an employee who, instead of giving you 8 hours of mediocre work, may be able to give you, 8 hours or 6 hours or whatever of really good work.
Yes, yes, yes,
So
that's true.
huge
That's true.
return on investment, huge return.
That's true. Thanks a lot, Anne. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you. We can speak for hours, right? Such an
absolutely.
interesting topic. So thanks a lot really for joining us. And I really appreciate sharing your experience with us and insights. Actually, the next time we have these discussions, we're going to be talking about neuroscience and learning in remote teams. Yeah, another interesting topic. So until next time, and in the meantime, you can tweet us on @OneCircleHR, and you can follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter, and see you next time.
Thank you so much. It's great.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you. Thanks a lot.